Hey everybody! Thank you guys so much for stopping by my channel here at The Magical Solution. I am live here on TikTok. Hi guys! I'm live here on YouTube and I'm live here on my private Facebook group page, which is The Magical Solution. This is how we grow Facebook page. So hello to everyone. Thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. Super excited. So we are moving on to chapters 24 to 27. I do not want anyone to feel discouraged. If this is your first time joining us tonight, thank you so much. And by all means, stay. This is the type of book, the Spirit Book by Allan Kardec, that you could definitely pick up at any point in the book and not feel lost. However, if you do want to join us and if you do want to catch up to where we are, all the previous chapters are on my YouTube channel at The Magical Solution. All right. So, by the way, Facebook group, if you guys want to leave comments in the section here, just make sure you give your screen name or your name because it doesn't show up on the chat. All right. All right. So let's get started. So we are on chapter called The Law of Labor. And this we're going to cover the necessity of labor and the limit of labor and rest with regards to spirit, right? So here we go. The necessity of labor. Let's do it. Question 674. Is the necessity of labor a law of nature? Labor is a law of nature, and as such, it is a necessity per se. Because civilization both increases people's needs and their enjoyments, it obliges them to work more. 675. Should we understand labor to entail only material occupations? No. The spirit labors as much as the body. Every useful occupation is a labor. 676. Why has labor been imposed on humankind? It is a consequence of their corporal nature. It is a means of expiation and at the same time a means of perfecting their intelligence. Without labor, humans would remain in intellectual infancy. Thus, they must owe their food, safety, and well-being to their own labor and activity. God has granted more intelligence to certain persons in order to compensate for their physical weakness, but labor is involved nonetheless. 667. Why does nature itself provide for all the needs of the animals? Everything in nature labors. Animals labor as you do, but their work, like their intelligence, is limited to their self-preservation. That is why labor does not lead to progress among them, while among human beings, it has a double objective: the preservation of the body and the development of the thought. The latter is also a necessity and raises them above themselves. When I say that the labor of animals is limited to self-preservation, I mean the objective toward which their labor is aimed. But while devoted entirely to providing for their physical needs, they are also unknowingly agents collaborating in the designs of the Creator. Their labor plays no less of a part in the final objective of nature, although you often do not see its immediate result. 678. On a more highly evolved world, are humans subjected to the same necessity of labor? The nature of labor is relative to that of the needs. The less material the needs, the less material the labor. Yet, you must not assume that humans on such worlds remain inactive and useless. Idleness would be a torture instead of a benefit. 679. Are those who possess plenty of assets to ensure their welfare exempt from the law of labor? From paid labor, perhaps, but not from the obligation to render themselves useful according to their means and to perfect their own or others' intelligence. This too is labor. If those to whom God has granted enough assets to ensure their welfare are not obligated to eat their bread from the sweat of their own brow, their obligation to be useful to their fellow creatures is all the greater. It is a portion they have received in advance, allowing them more free time to do good. 680. Aren't there those who are capable of working at anything at all and whose existence serves no purpose? God is just and only condemns those who intentionally live a life that serve no purpose because they live by depending on other people's work. God desires for all to make themselves useful according to their own faculties. 681. Does the law of nature impose upon children the obligation to work for their parents? Certainly, just as parents must work for their children. That is why God has made filial love and parental love natural sentiments so that by such mutual love the members of the family may be led to help each other. This is frequently not recognized in your present society. So now on the subject of the limit of labor and rest. 682. Since rest is needed after labor, isn't rest therefore a law of nature? Absolutely. Rest serves to restore the strength of the body. It is also needed to give a little more freedom to the intelligence to raise itself above nature. It's interesting that he says this here because it is proven that in order for the brain to function better, in order for the brain to process information, you must rest, right? So inevitably, it makes you smarter to sleep, right? 683. What is the limit of labor? The limit of one's strength, however, in this regard, God leaves people free to decide what their limit is. 684. What is to be thought of those who abuse their authority by imposing too much work on their subordinates? It is one of the worst things that they could do. All who have the power of command are responsible for any excessive work they impose on their subordinates, since if they do so, they transgress the law of God. 685. Do humans have the right to retire in old age? Yeah, none are required to labor beyond their ability to do so. But what resources do aging people have available if they must earn a living but cannot? The strong should work for the weak. In the absence of a family, society should replace it. That is the law of charity. Pay close attention to that. Pay close attention to that. I'll read it again. The strong should work for the weak. In the absence of a family, society should replace it. That is the law of charity. It is enough to tell people they must work. It is also necessary for those who make their living from their labor to actually be able to find employment, but this does not always happen. Whenever the lack of available work is widespread, it assumes the proportions of a calamity, much like a famine. Economic science seeks a remedy in the balance between production and consumption, but this balance, supposing that it is possible, will always experience cycles, and during such phases, workers must still make a living. There is an element that has not been sufficiently pondered, but without which economic science is nothing more than a theory, and that is education. Not intellectual education, but moral education. Not moral education through books, but moral education that consists in the art of forming character. Moral education that creates habits, because education is the sum of acquired habits. When one considers the mass of individuals who are daily thrown into the torrent of the population without principles, without restraints, and handed over to their own instincts, can we wonder at this disastrous consequences? When the art of education is recognized, understood, and practiced, all individuals the world over will follow the habits of order and forethought for themselves and their dependents. They will respect whatever is respectable and will have habits that will enable them to less painfully endure unavoidable adverse days. Disorder and lack of forethought are two sores that only a sound education can heal. That is the starting point, the real element of well being, the guarantee of security for all. Mm. All right, we are now on the subject or the chapter of the law of reproduction. And in this chapter, it talks about the global population, the succession and perfecting of the races, obstacles to reproduction, marriage and celibacy, and polygamy. Ooh, some hot button subjects. Let's do it. All right, the global population, 686. Is the reproduction of living beings a law of nature? Obviously, without reproduction, the corporal world would die out. 687. If the population continues to follow the constant progression that we now see, will a time come in which it is too excessive for the earth? No. God has foreseen this and always keeps everything in balance. God does nothing useless. Since they only see one angle of the picture of nature, humans are unable to perceive the harmony of the whole. We're now on the subject of the succession and perfecting of the races. 688. At this moment, there are certain races, human races, that are obviously diminishing. Will a time come when they will have completely disappeared from the earth? Yes, but others will have taken their place, as others will someday take yours. 689. Are the human beings of today a new creation, or are they the perfected descendants of primitive beings? They are the same spirits. They have returned to perfect themselves in new bodies, but they are still far from perfection. Thus, the present human race, which, through its growth, tends to invade the whole earth and to replace the races that are dying out, will also go through its own period of decrease and extinction. Other, more perfected races will replace it. These will have descendant from the present ones, just as the civilized human beings of the present day have descended from the brutes and primitives of early years. Woo! 690. From a purely physical point of view, are the bodies of the present race of special creation are a special creation, or have they evolved from more primitive bodies by way of reproduction? The origin of the human race is lost in the night of time, but since all belong to one great human family, whatever the primitive root of each race were, they have since been able to mix with one another and produce new types. 691. From a physical standpoint, what is the distinctive and dominant characteristics of these primitive races? The development of brute strength at the expense of intellectual prowess. The opposite is occurring nowadays. Humans act more through their intelligence than through physical strength, and yet they accomplish 100 times more because they have placed the forces of nature at their service, which the animals cannot do. 692. Is the improvement of animal and vegetable species through the science contrary to natural law? Wouldn't it be more in conformance with that law to allow things to follow their normal courses? Everything must be done to arrive at perfection. Humans themselves are an instrument that God uses as a means for accomplishing the divine ends. Since perfection is the goal toward which nature tends, to favor such perfection is to correspond to those ends. Okay, but in their efforts to improve various species, humans are generally motivated by a personal sentiment that has no other goal than to increase their own enjoyments. So, doesn't this diminish their merit? What does it matter that their merits are void of provided progress it has made? It is up to them to render their labor praiseworthy through their intention. Besides, by means of such labor, they exercise and develop their intelligence, and it is from this aspect that they derive the greatest benefit. We're now on the subject of obstacles to reproduction. 693. Are the human laws and customs that have their objective, sorry, are the human laws and customs that have as their objective or as their result the creation of obstacles to reproduction contrary to the laws of nature? Everything that hinders the operations of nature is contrary to the overall law. Okay, nevertheless, there are species of living beings, both animals and plants, whose unrestrained reproduction would be harmful to other species and of which humans themselves would soon be victims. Would it be wrong to hinder their reproduction? God has given to humans, above all other living beings, a power that they should use for good and not for abuse. They may regulate reproduction according to their needs. They may regulate reproduction according to their needs, but they should not hinder it unnecessarily. The intelligent action of humankind is a counterbalance set by God among the forces of nature to reestablish their equilibrium. This is what further distinguishes humans from the animals, because humans do so with full awareness. In their turn, the animals take part in this equilibrium. While the instinct of destruction has been given to the animals as a means for their own self preservation, it is also caused to hinder the excessive and perhaps dangerous overpopulation of the animal and vegetable species that nourish them. Mm, 694. What should be thought about means that are meant to prevent reproduction with a view to satisfying sensuality? It proves the predominance of the body over the soul and demonstrates how deeply humans are immersed in matter. Ooh, that spirit just told this person, just told him, y'all be playing too much. That's what he literally just said. He's like, see, that just goes to show that you are just stuck in your physical sensations and not focusing on the soul. You guys talk about sensuality and all this stuff, and you need to rise above this. That's a base materialistic human nature, right? So now we're on the subject of marriage and celibacy. 695. Is marriage the permanent union of two individuals contrary to the law of nature? It represents progress in the evolution of humankind. 696. What effect would abolishing marriage have on human society? A return to the life of animals. The free and fortuitous union of the sexes belongs to the state of nature. Marriage is one of the primary acts of progress in human society because it establishes fraternal solidarity and may be found among all cultures, though under the most diverse expressions. Abolishing marriage would therefore be a return to humankind infancy and would place humans even below some animals that demonstrate examples of stable unions. 697. Does the absolute indissolubility of marriage belong to the law of nature, or is it only a human law? It is a human law that is quite contrary to the law of nature. But humans may modify their laws, only those of nature are immutable. Okay, well, is voluntary celibacy a state of perfection that is meritorious in God's sight? No. And those who live that way out of selfishness displease God and mislead others. 699. Okay. So isn't celibacy a sacrifice for certain individuals who desire to devote themselves entirely to serving humankind? Haha, that is very different. I said out of selfishness. See, every personal sacrifice is meritorious when it is made for the good. The greater the sacrifice, the greater the merit. God cannot be self contradictory or regard as wrongful what has been divinely made. Thus, God cannot see any merit in the violation of the divine law. Even though celibacy per se is not a meritorious state, it becomes such when constitutes a sacrifice made on behalf of humankind by the renunciation of the joys of the family life. Every personal sacrifice with a view to doing good and without selfish ulterior motive elevates the individual above his or her material condition. We're now on the topic of polygamy. 700. Is the approximate numerical equality between the sexes an indication of the proportions in which they ought to be united? Yes, for everything in nature has a final purpose. 701. Which of the two, polygamy or monogamy, is more in harmony with the law of nature? Polygamy is a human law, and abolishing it is a mark of social progress. In God's view, marriage should be based on the love of the individuals who join hands. In polygamy, there is no true love. There is nothing more than sensuality. If polygamy were in accord with with the law of nature, it would be universal, which would be materially impossible due to the numerical equality of the sexes. Polygamy must be regarded as an institution or particularly legislation appropriate for certain customs, but which social perfection will make disappear little by little. Ooh, that's a rough one because I know there's a lot of people out there that who are polyamorous. Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow on this one, right? Okay, so we're now on the chapter about self-preservation. And in this chapter, we'll be talking about the self-preservation instinct, the means of self-preservation, the enjoyment of material things, necessary and superfluous things, voluntary privation, mortifications. That's a mouthful, but we'll get there. So, the self preservation instinct. Is the self preservation instinct a law of nature? Absolutely. All living beings possess it, regardless of their degree of intelligence. In some, it is purely mechanical, in others, it is thought out. 703. What was God's purpose in granting the instinct of self preservation to all living beings? All beings must collaborate in the designs of providence. That is why God has given them the need to stay alive. Besides, life is necessary for beings to perfect themselves. They sense this instinctively without perceiving it. The subject of the means of self preservation. Yes. How do you say it? Pol- polygamy. Not polygamy, it's polygamy. Thank you very much. 704. Since God has given human beings the need to stay alive, does God always provide them with the means of doing so? Yes. And if they do not find them, it is because they do not understand them. God cannot have given humans the need to stay alive without also having given them the means to do so. Hence, the Creator has caused the earth to produce in such a way as to provide for the needs of all its inhabitants, for only that which is necessary is useful. The superfluous never is. 705. Why doesn't the earth always produce enough to provide for humans' needs? Since they are ungrateful, they neglect her. Nevertheless, she is an excellent mother. Frequently, they blame nature for the consequences of their own incompetence or lack of foresight. The earth would always produce what is needed if humans knew how to be content. If she does not supply all their needs, it is because they use her to provide themselves with superfluities instead of necessities. Look at the nomads in the desert. They always find enough to live on because they do not create imaginary needs. But when half of all that is produced is wasted on satisfying fanciful desires, should people wonder at finding nothing the next day and have a reason to pity themselves at being deprived in times of scarcity? In truth, I tell you that nature does not lack foresight. Rather, people do not know how to control themselves. 706. Should we understand only the products of the soil as being the fruits of the earth? The soil is the original source from which all other resources derive, because in the last analysis, such resources are only a transformation of the products of the soil. For that reason, we should understand the fruits of the earth to be everything that humans can enjoy in this world. 707. The means of substance are frequently lacking for certain individuals. Subsistence, sorry. Even in the midst of the abundance around them. To what is this fact due? It is primarily due to the selfishness of humans, who do not always do what they should. Next, and most often, it is due to humans themselves. Seek and you shall find. These words do not mean that it is enough to simply look to the earth in order to find what you desire. Instead, you must seek with ardor and perseverance, without feebleness, and without allowing yourself to be discouraged by obstacles that are quite often no more than means of putting your tenacity, patience, and firmness to the test. If civilization multiplies our needs, it also multiplies the sources of labor and the means for living. But one must agree that in this sense, there is still much to be done. When civilization has accomplished its task, no one will be able to say that they lack what is needed, except through their own fault. For many, misfortune happens when they choose a path nature has not traced out for them. And that is when they lack the intelligence required to succeed. There is a place in the sun for all, but on the condition that all take their own place and not that of others. Nature cannot be responsible for the vices of social organization and for the consequences of ambition and vanity. We would have to be blind, however, if we did not recognize that progress that the most advanced cultures have made in this sense, thanks to the laudable efforts that philanthropy and science together have unceasingly put forth for the improvement of humankind's material conditions, and notwithstanding the constant increase in population, insufficiently of production has been attenuated, at least for the most part, and the most calamitous years have no comparison to those in former times. Public hygiene, the element of essential to energy and health but unknown to our ancestors, is the object of an enlightened mindfulness. The unfortunate and suffering find places of refuge, and science has been into action everywhere, contributing to the growth of everyone's well-being. Might it be, might it be said that we have finally attained perfection? Oh, certainly not. But what has been accomplished so far has given us an idea of what can be done with perseverance If men and women are sensible enough to seek happiness in real, serious things rather than in utopias that cause them to go backward instead of advancing. 708. Aren't there situations in which the means of subsistence, sorry, do not depend solely on human will, and where the lack of the barest necessities is a consequence of circumstance? These situations are frequently cruel trials which humans must undergo, and to which they know they will be exposed. Their merit is in their submission to God's will if their intelligence does not furnish them with some means for escaping their difficulty. If death must touch them, they should submit to it without complaint, reasoning that their hour of true freedom has arrived, and that despair at that final moment may cause them to lose the fruit of their reassignment. 709. Have those who in critical situations were obligated to sacrifice their fellow beings to appease their hunger committed a crime? If it was a crime, was it lessened by the need to stay alive, which the preservation instinct has given to them? So basically, he's asking if a person was put in a very serious situation in which he had to basically eat, another human being, would that be considered a crime, or does that still fall into the factor of self-preservation, and can he be excused from that? And the spirit says, I've already responded in saying that there is more merit in undergoing all the trials of life with selflessness and courage. In this case, there is a homicide and crime against nature, and it must be doubly punished. So basically, Spirit is saying, I would have rather him starve to death than to kill another person and eat him. 710. On worlds where their physical makeup is purer, do the living beings have need of nourishment? Yes, but their food is in keeping with their nature. Such food would not be substantial enough for your dense digestive systems, and likewise, they would not be able to digest your food. It's interesting that he says that here because I have met and I have interviewed and I have spoken to and I have spent a lot of time with spiritual elders and people like Buddhist monks and priests and things like that. And one of the common things that I noticed among all of them is that they don't eat very much. They eat very little. And the little bit that they do eat, it's very, like, pure food. It's like fruits, it's vegetables, it's like a little bit of rice. It's like it's a little bit of very jam-packed, nutritious food, but, like, a little bit of it, and they don't engage in it all day long. And and yet their body is so physically fit, like, they're not, like, super skinny, they don't look depraved, and that just goes to show that when you start elevating, when your energy starts rising, your your whole system changes. The way your nervous system, your endocrine system, your digestive system, all of it adjusts and raises its frequency as well. And the needs that you once had as a very base human, the needs to eat McDonald's and heavy meats and the need to smoke and drink and have a lot of sex, all that stuff starts to dissipate because the body no longer identifies with that base matter, that heavy physical matter. And you can nourish yourself on lighter, nutritious things. And it's just interesting that he says this here, and that you can also see that in other cultures, and you can read this in other spiritual texts as well. So we're now on the subject of the enjoyment of material things. So mind you, guys, I stopped reading at 8 o'clock. Okay, so if you guys are curious of when this ends, I end at 8 o'clock. The enjoyment of material things. Question 711. Is the use of the fruits of the earth a right of all humans? That right is a consequence of the need to stay alive. God would not impose a duty without granting the means to fulfill it. 7:12. Toward what end has God made the enjoyment of material things attractive? To drive humans to fulfill their missions and also to test them with temptation. So, what is the purpose of such a temptation? To develop their reasons so that they may learn to keep themselves from excesses. If humans had only been driven to utilize the fruits of the earth because of their usefulness, their indifference could have compromised the harmony of the universe. God has given them the attraction of pleasure, and this in turn incites them to accomplish the designs of providence. However, through the same attraction, God also wills to test them with temptation, and this incites them to abuse. Nonetheless, their reason should free them from it. Mm, 7:13. Do enjoyments have bounds traced out by nature? Yes, to show you the limit of what is necessary. But through your excesses, you bring on satiety, satiety, satiation. So like this want, right? And thus you end up punishing yourself, right? So you crave. It's like this craving. 7:14. So what should be thought of those who seek to satisfy their tastes through all kinds of excesses? They are unfortunate creatures, whom we should pity and not envy, because they are very close to death. Is it a physical or moral death that they are close to? Both. Those who seek to satisfy their taste through excesses of all kinds place themselves below animals, because animals at least know how to limit themselves to satisfying their needs. Such persons negate the reason that God has given them for their guidance. And the greater their excesses, the greater is the domain they give their animal nature over the spiritual. The illnesses, ailments, and death that result from abuse are also punishment for transgressing God's law. Okay, so we're now on the subject of necessary and superfluous things. 7:15. Let me take a sip. Mm, okay. How can people know the limit of what is necessary? Those who are sensible know it by intuition, but many recognize it at the cost of their own experience. 7:16. Hasn't nature traced out the limit of what is necessary in our own physical organization? Yes, but people are insatiable. Nature has traced out the limits of their needs in their physical organization, but their vices alter their constitution and create artificial needs. 7:17. What should be thought of those who monopolize the fruits of the earth to procure for themselves what is superfluous at the expense of others who lack what is necessary? They do not understand God's law and will have to answer for their privations that they have caused. The line between what is necessary and what is superfluous is not absolute. Civilizations has created necessities that do not exist in the primitive state, and the spirits who dictate these precepts do not mean for civilized humans to live like primitives. Everything is relative and is up to reason to place each thing in its proper place. Civilization develops moral sense and at the same time the sentiment of charity, which leads people to mutually support one another. Those who live at the expense of others, privations exploit the benefits of civilizations for their own profit. They have only the varnish of civility, just as there are persons who possess no more of religion than its appearance. We're now on the subject of voluntary privations, Mortifications. I think that's the last subject. Yep, only 2 pages. Here we go. 718. Does the law of self preservation oblige us to provide for our own physical needs? Yes, because without energy and health, labor is impossible. 719. Are we culpable for seeking our own well being? Well being is a natural desire. God only prohibits abuse because it is contrary to self preservation. God does not consider it a crime for you to seek your own well being. If it is not gained at another's expense, and if it is not to weaken either your moral or physical strength. 720. Do voluntary privations, which have their aim an equally voluntary expiation, have any merit in God's sight? Do good to others and you will have greater merit. Period. Point blank. Are there any meritorious voluntary privations? Yes. The privation of meaningless pleasures, because it frees you from matter and elevates your soul. Merit means resisting the temptation that drives you to excess and the taste for useless things. And it means taking from your own necessities in order to give to those in need. If privation is nothing more than pretense, it is only a mockery. 721. A life of mortifications through asceticism has been practiced since ancient times and among different cultures. It is meritorious. Is it meritorious from any point of view? So what he's talking about with mortifications is, flogging, beating yourself, fasting, ritual piercings, things that cause your body pain, a lot of like suffering. And what he's asking is, there's a lot of cultures out there who practice this kind of thing, and is there merit to this? Like, does God seek favor in this kind of activity? That's what he's asking. Ask for whom it is useful, and you will have your answer. If it only serves the one who practices it, and if it hinders him or her from doing good to others, it is selfish. Whatever may be the pretext under which it is disguised, submitting oneself to privation and working on behalf of others is true mortification according to Christian charity. 722. Is the abstention from certain foods prescribed among various cultures based on reason? So, veganism, or, not eating pork or whatever. Like, certain cultures tell you to not engage in certain foods, like, is there a reason for that? Everything that humans can eat without harming their health is permitted. Lawmakers, however, have prohibited certain foods with a useful end in mind, and in order to give greater weight to their laws, they have represented them as having come from God. So, what the Spirit is saying here is, you need to go by the science. What does science say about how the body functions? And what is good for the body, you can eat. If it's not good for the body, don't eat it. But don't assume that just because it comes from the law of man, or just because a religion says don't eat this, don't think that that's a law from God, because that's not what the Spirit is saying, right? 723. Is humankind's use of animals as food contrary to the law of nature? So now he's getting into, should we be eating meat? The answer: with your present physical constitution, flesh nourishes flesh. Otherwise, humans would perish. The law of self preservation imposes on you the duty to preserve your energies and health so that you may fulfill the law of labor. You should therefore eat according to your physical requirements. 724. In the abstention from foods, animals or otherwise, is this abstention meritorious or an expiation? Yes. If you deprive yourselves for the sake of others, but God cannot see mortification when there is no serious and useful privation. This is why we say that those who only seem to deprive themselves are hypocrites. 725. What are we to think of the mutilations? Sorry. What are we to think of the mutilations practiced on the body of humans or animals? So harming the body or harming animals. What do we think about that? Well, what is the point of such a question? Again, ask yourself whether a thing is useful. What is useless cannot be pleasing to God, and what is harmful is always displeasing to God. You can be very sure that God is sensitive only to the sentiments that raise the soul toward God. It is by practicing the divine laws instead of violating them that you can shake off the burdens of your terrestrial matter. 726. If the sufferings of this world enable us to evolve, depending on the matter in which we bear them, may we also evolve through suffering that we create intentionally? Natural suffering are the only ones that enable you to evolve because they come from God. Intentional suffering serve no purpose when they have no value for the good of others. Do you believe that those who shorten their lives through superhuman hardships, the bonzes, the fakirs, a few fanatics of various sects, progress on their path? Why don't they labor for the good of their neighbors instead? Let them clothe the indignant, comfort those who mourn, work for those who are infirm, and endure privations to help the unfortunate. Then their life will be useful and pleasing to God. When you only have yourselves in mind in the intentional hardships to which you subject yourselves, it is selfish. And when you suffer for others, it is a practice of charity. Such are the precepts of Christ. So this even goes as far as to say, like, your own internal anxieties and depressions and your own internal sufferings that you impose upon yourself, they're useless. They serve you no purpose. And so therefore it's not bringing you closer. It's only separating you further from God, right? So like, or like if you purposefully put yourself in a bad situation, or like, those young kids who are like, I'm gonna go homeless for like a year. I'm gonna like leave. I'm gonna run away from home. I'm gonna just leave. I'm just gonna like live in the woods, and just like be homeless for a year because I want to know what it's like to suffer and struggle, right? Like those kids, you just want to slap them around because it's like, wow, it must be nice to like put on the aesthetic of homelessness and then be able to take it off whenever you feel like it, right? Whereas there are real homeless people out there who are truly suffering. You can just like kind of like do like a homeless vacation and just kind of like, you know, pornographize, or what is it called? You can, sensualize this idea of homelessness. And in God's eyes, that is like fucking bullshit according to this. You know what I mean? Like you're not getting closer to God by doing these acts, right? 727. Since we should not create intentional sufferings for ourselves that are of no use to others, should we nevertheless protect ourselves from those that we foresee or from those that threaten us? The self preservation instinct has been given to all beings against dangers and sufferings. Whip your spirit and not your body. Mortify your pride and stifle your selfishness, that serpent devouring your heart, and you will do more for your progress than through the self inflictions that no longer have a place in this day and age. Wow, you guys, we went through these chapters really fast. Wow. So next week, next Sunday, we'll be doing the law of destruction. And we'll be talking about like war and murder and cruelty and the death penalty and all that stuff according to God and spirit and all that good stuff. So definitely join me next Sunday, same time, same place, right? 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on YouTube, Facebook, and TikTok. Now, if you guys have any questions, now is your time to ask them. Otherwise, I will cut it short. Let's see. Hi, Madrina. How you doing? If there's anyone else in this chat, say hello. Let's see. Jerry, thank you so much for hanging. Miss Lopez, thank you guys for like sticking by and hanging out. I'm seeing a lot of stuff here. Um, let's see. They get their energy from around. Yes. Luxuries, yes. Lot of great stuff. Lot of great stuff. So we have a question here. Hi, Kathy. So if you are born in a certain culture that eats certain food that some people think is bad, it is not bad for those who are doing what they were raised in and accepted by God because we grew up in it. Exactly. Exactly. But I think the even better answer to that is do what is good for your health. So, the one thing I will say about this book is that this book really encourages you to know science. Like, it encourages you to bridge the gap between science and spirituality because science informs spirit and spirit informs science. So, yes, culturally, I definitely think that that is super important to eat the foods that are from your culture because just genetically, your digestive system has been accustomed to and has been created by just, you know, ancestor after ancestor after ancestor of your line of eating these same kind of foods. And so your digestive system is used to that already. It's been programmed to eat this certain way. And so it makes sense to eat the foods of your culture. I'll give you a perfect example. So my husband, he's from India. And my culture is of Puerto Rican descent, right? And both India and Puerto Rico, we love our spice. We love our hot peppers, right? We love to make things spicy, right? Now, there was one time where he and I were cooking and we were deciding on which peppers to put in our food. And he said to me, he goes, "Oh, Leilani, I can't eat the jalapenos. I can't eat the peppers that you eat." And I'm like, "Why?" He goes, "It's too hot for me." I'm like, "Huh?" And I'm sitting here like just eating jalapenos just like raw. I'm just like taking them and eating them like it's nothing to me. And then I said to him, I was like, "Well, I can't eat the peppers that you eat because it's too hot for me. Like it hurts when I eat your peppers." Meanwhile, he is over there talking about, "Oh no, this is delicious. I eat this all the time." And so that just goes to show like our gut, our system has been genetically throughout all this time to eat what we eat because of our culture and because of where we come from, right? Even though they're both peppers, even though they're both spicy, even though they may be on the same level of spice, because that pepper came from India and his people have eaten that for generations, and my pepper came from Puerto Rico and my people have been eating that for generations, we have a different reaction to that. So it's really important to follow your culture, but also follow what's good for overall health and what's good for you. So if you have stomach problems, if you have heart problems, if you have, eat the foods that will alleviate that and help with that. But that was a great question. Yes, it's the things that make you sick and weak that are crimes against our own human. Exactly. There's no reason to inflict those pains upon yourself. There's no, and you see people doing this in an effort to get closer to God, right? So you see people fasting, you see people, flogging themselves, you see people doing certain things. And what he's saying in the book is that's okay if you're doing that on behalf of someone else, or if you're doing that in charity of, or if you're doing that in whatever in whatever service you need to do that for. But if you're just doing that for your own personal selfish desires to get closer to God, God is like, "I don't need that shit. Like, you don't need to do that. Like, that's not necessary." You know what I mean? Like, I'm here. Like, it's okay. What I want you to do is be charitable. What I want you to do is give to those who don't have. If you have, then give to those who don't. You know what I mean? And in that mind frame, literally no one will be without. If everyone gives of themselves, no one will be without. And that's the whole point of how we grow and how we, get through this together. Because life is hard, you guys. Like life is like super hard. And the only way to get through it is with each other. You know what I mean? Like, there's so much stuff going on in the world and so many divides. Like it just doesn't make any sense, and we should be basking in our diversity. We should be, really being excited about how different we all are, and the fact that my husband can eat peppers that I can't eat, like, that's so exciting. I'm not mad because I can't eat it. I don't hate him because I can't eat certain things or engage in certain things that he has. it makes me excited to learn about him, to learn about his culture, to learn about his language, and vice versa. And I feel like if we have that with each other, I think it's just all the more better. And I think that according to this book, is really what the whole point is. You know what I mean? Okay, I'm gonna get off my soapbox. I'm gonna get off my soapbox. Any other questions before we go, you guys? Based on our Constitution, exactly, Kathy, exactly. All right, if there's no other questions, again, I want to thank you guys so much for joining me tonight. So next week, which is, let's take a look, that's in March, because we're in March now. It'll be March 7th, 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, same place. Okay, you guys, thank you so much, and have a beautiful night, everyone. Good night.